Sophie had always been fascinated by the abandoned house on the edge of town. It was said to be haunted, and the townspeople avoided it at all costs. But Sophie was not afraid. She was determined to explore the old house and see if there was any truth to the rumors. One night, she sneaked out of her house and made her way to the abandoned house. As she entered the house, she was struck by how eerie it was. The air was thick with dust and cobwebs, and the floorboards creaked beneath her feet. As she made her way through the house, she heard strange noises coming from the walls. At first, she tried to convince herself that it was just her imagination, but the sounds grew louder and more persistent. Suddenly, she heard a voice whispering her name. She turned around to see a ghostly figure floating in front of her. It was a young girl, with long black hair and a pale face. Sophie tried to run, but she found that she was frozen in place. The ghostly figure floated closer to her, and Sophie could see that the girl's eyes were hollow and empty. The ghostly figure whispered again, "Why are you here?" Sophie tried to speak, but no words came out. The ghostly figure continued, "You shouldn't be here. This house is cursed." Sophie finally found her voice and asked, "What do you want from me?" The ghostly figure replied, "Leave this place, and never come back." Sophie turned and ran out of the house as fast as she could. As she looked back at the old house, she saw the ghostly figure staring at her through the window. Sophie knew that she had narrowly escaped the haunted house, but the memory of the ghostly figure would haunt her for the rest of her life. Lena had always been fascinated by the abandoned hospital on the outskirts of town. The rumors said that it had been shut down years ago due to unethical medical practices, and that the spirits of those who had suffered and died within its walls still haunted the place. Lena didn't believe in ghosts, and so she decided to explore the abandoned hospital one night. She snuck into the building and started to explore the dusty, abandoned hallways. As she wandered through the building, Lena heard strange noises coming from one of the rooms. She cautiously approached the door and pushed it open, revealing a small, dark room with a single hospital bed. As Lena stepped inside, she felt a sudden chill run down her spine. She looked down at the hospital bed and saw a figure lying there. It was a woman, with long, tangled hair and a pale face. Lena could see that she was barely breathing and her skin was cold to the touch. Lena tried to leave the room, but she found that she was frozen in place. The woman's eyes snapped open, revealing pitch-black pupils. The woman sat up in the bed and started to speak in a voice that sounded like it was coming from the depths of hell. "Get out," the woman hissed. "This place is cursed. It's a place of death and suffering, and you don't belong here." Lena tried to run, but she found that her legs wouldn't move. The woman continued to speak, her voice growing louder and more menacing with every passing second. "You're not safe here," she said. "The ghosts of the dead will come for you. They'll tear you apart and drag you down into the darkness." Lena finally managed to break free of the spell and ran out of the room as fast as she could. As she emerged from the abandoned hospital, she heard the sound of ghostly laughter echoing behind her. From that day on, Lena knew that the rumors about the abandoned hospital were true. It was a place of darkness and death, haunted by the spirits of the dead. She never returned to the hospital again, but the memory of the woman's voice and the feeling of being trapped in that room would stay with her for the rest of her life. It was just another ordinary day for Emily, until she received a text message from an unknown number. The message read, "I'm watching you." Emily brushed it off as a prank and went about her day, but as the day progressed, she received more and more messages from the same number. The messages were getting creepier and creepier, and Emily started to feel uneasy. The messages weren't just random threats anymore. They were more sinister, like someone was taunting her. The messages would say things like, "I know what you did or you can't escape me." Emily tried to block the number, but the messages kept coming. She even went to the police, but they told her that they couldn't do anything unless the person made a direct threat against her. One night, Emily was alone in her apartment when she received another message. This one was different. It was a picture of her apartment building, taken from outside. She could see her own window in the picture, and it looked like someone was watching her from outside. Emily started to panic. She didn't know who was sending her these messages or why. She tried to call her friends and family, but no one answered. She was completely alone. As she sat there, trembling with fear, her phone started to ring. It was the unknown number again. She hesitated before answering, but her curiosity got the better of her. "Hello?" she said, her voice shaking. There was a long pause on the other end of the line. Then, a low, menacing voice spoke. "I told you I was watching you," the voice said. "And now I'm going to come for you." Emily hung up the phone and ran to her door, but it was too late. The door burst open, and a figure emerged from the darkness. Emily tried to scream, but no sound came out. All she could do was watch as the figure slowly advanced toward her, ready to claim its next victim. The next day, Emily's body was found in her apartment. The police searched for the unknown number, but it had vanished without a trace. Emily's friends and family could only wonder who had sent the messages, and what had driven them to commit such a heinous act. There was a legend in the small town of Millfield about a haunted house on the outskirts of town. The house had been abandoned for years, but people still claimed to see strange lights and hear eerie noises coming from inside. One day, a group of teenagers decided to explore the house. They were looking for a thrill, and they figured the old haunted house would be the perfect place to find it. As they approached the house, they could see that it was in a state of disrepair. The windows were boarded up, and the paint was peeling off the walls. But that didn't deter them. They were determined to find out what was inside. The group made their way inside, and as soon as they stepped through the door, they could feel a chill in the air. The house was dark and musty, and it smelled like rotting wood. As they explored the house, they started to hear strange noises. Footsteps creaking on the old wooden floors, whispers coming from the shadows. But every time they turned around, there was nothing there. Finally, they found themselves in the basement. It was pitch black, and they couldn't see anything. But they could hear something moving around in the darkness. Suddenly, a figure emerged from the shadows. It was a woman, dressed in an old-fashioned gown. Her hair was long and unkempt, and her face was twisted in an expression of anger and pain. The teenagers tried to run, but they couldn't find the way out. The woman was chasing them, and a ghostly voice echoed through the halls. "You should not be here," she said. "This is my house, and you are not welcome." The teenagers finally managed to find the front door, but when they opened it, they found themselves in a different place. They were no longer in Millfield. They were in a different town, a different state, a different time. The woman's ghost had transported them to another place, where they were forced to live out the rest of their lives in a world they didn't belong to. And the legend of the haunted house in Millfield lived on, as a warning to those who dared to enter. Maria had always been a skeptical person. She didn't believe in curses, ghosts, or any other supernatural phenomenon. But all of that changed when she visited a small village on the outskirts of the city. While exploring the village, Maria came across an old woman who was selling various items in a small market. The woman looked at Maria and said, "I can see that you're carrying a heavy burden. Would you like me to help you lift it?" Maria was taken aback by the woman's words. She didn't know what she was talking about. but she was curious. So she nodded her head in agreement. The woman took out a small vial and handed it to Maria. "Drink this," she said. "It will cleanse your spirit and lift the burden from your soul." Maria didn't think twice. She took the vial and drank it without hesitation. But as soon as she swallowed it, she felt a strange sensation in her body. It was like her spirit was engulfed in a never-ending fire. At first, Maria thought it was just a side effect of the potion, and that it would go away soon. But it didn't. The fire kept burning, and it was getting worse by the day. Maria went to see a doctor, but he couldn't find anything wrong with her. He ran all kinds of tests, but they all came back negative. The doctor told Maria that she was probably just experiencing some kind of mental breakdown, and that she should seek help from a therapist. But Maria knew that it wasn't in her head. The fire was real, and it was consuming her from the inside out. She tried to explain to the doctors what was happening to her, but they all dismissed her as being insane. Days turned into weeks, and weeks turned into months. Maria was left to suffer in silence, with no one to help her. She could feel her spirit slowly being consumed by the fire, and she knew that it wouldn't be long before it destroyed her completely. One day, Maria went back to the village where she had met the old woman. She searched high and low for her, hoping that she could help her lift the curse that had been placed on her. But the old woman was nowhere to be found. It was like she had disappeared into thin air. Maria realized then that she was alone in her suffering. The curse had taken hold of her, and there was nothing she could do to stop it. She would be left to suffer in agony for the rest of her life, with no one to help her. And so, Maria became a shell of her former self. She was consumed by the fire, and her spirit was destroyed. The curse had claimed another victim, and there was nothing anyone could do to stop it. There was a small town that was surrounded by a dense forest. The townspeople had always been wary of the forest, believing it to be cursed. They avoided it at all costs, and no one ever ventured into its depths. One day, a group of teenagers decided to explore the forest. They had heard stories of strange creatures and supernatural phenomena that lived within its borders, and they were eager to uncover its secrets. As they made their way deeper into the forest, they began to hear strange noises. It was like someone or something was watching them, but they couldn't see anything. Suddenly, they came across a clearing. In the center of the clearing stood a tall, ancient tree. The tree was unlike any they had ever seen before, with twisted roots and branches that seemed to reach towards the sky. As they approached the tree, they noticed that there was something hanging from one of its branches. It was a small, wooden box, intricately carved with strange symbols. The teenagers were hesitant at first, but their curiosity got the best of them. They opened the box, and inside, they found a small, silver key. The key seemed to call out to them, and they knew that they had to find out what it unlocked. They searched the forest for hours, looking for anything that the key might fit into. As they were about to give up, they stumbled upon an old, abandoned house. It was hidden deep within the forest, and they had never seen it before. They tried the key in the lock, and to their surprise, it opened. They cautiously entered the house, and as they explored its dark, eerie rooms, they realized that something was off. The furniture was covered in dust and cobwebs, as if it had been touched in years. But there were also strange symbols etched into the walls and floors, and strange, otherworldly objects scattered throughout the rooms. As they continued to explore, they came across a locked door. They tried the key, and it opened with ease. But what they found inside the room was beyond anything they could have imagined. It was a portal to another world, a world filled with monsters and demons and unspeakable horrors. They had unwittingly unleashed an ancient evil that had been trapped behind the door for centuries. And now, it was free to wreak havoc on the world once again. The teenagers tried to flee, but it was too late. The creatures from the other world had already taken hold of the town, and there was no escape. And that's when they realized the shocking truth. The cursed forest was never meant to keep the monsters out, it was meant to keep them in. And now, they had unleashed them upon the world. The teenagers were responsible for dooming their town, and there was nothing they could do to stop it. The only thing left to do was to pray for a miracle, and hope that somehow, they could make things right. There was a woman named Sarah who had always been jealous of her friend, Emily. Emily was kind and beautiful, and everyone loved her. Sarah, on the other hand, felt invisible. One day, Sarah's jealousy got the best of her, and she did something terrible. She betrayed Emily, spreading rumors about her that were completely false. Emily was devastated, and their friendship was shattered. Sarah felt guilty about what she had done, but she was too afraid to admit the truth to Emily and ask for forgiveness. Days turned into weeks, and weeks turned into months. Sarah tried to forget about what she had done, but she couldn't escape the guilt that was eating away at her. And then, the haunting began. It started with small things, like objects moving on their own and strange whispers in the night. But it quickly escalated to something much more sinister. Sarah would wake up in the middle of the night to find Emily standing at the foot of her bed, her eyes glowing with anger and betrayal. Emily's voice would echo through Sarah's mind, reminding her of what she had done and how she had hurt her. Sarah tried to ignore it, but the haunting only got worse. Emily's ghost would follow her wherever she went, and Sarah could feel her presence constantly. She became paranoid and afraid, and she couldn't escape the guilt and shame that consumed her. Finally, Sarah could take it no longer. She knew what she had to do. She went to Emily's grave and begged for forgiveness, tears streaming down her face. And then, something miraculous happened. Emily's ghost appeared before her, no longer filled with anger and betrayal. Instead, she was at peace. Emily forgave Sarah, and the haunting stopped. Sarah was finally able to let go of the guilt and shame that had been haunting her for so long. She knew that she could never undo what she had done, but she could make amends and try to be a better person in the future. From that day on, Sarah was a changed woman. She had learned that the cost of betrayal was too high, and that the ghosts of the past could haunt you for a long time if you didn't confront them. Emily was a kind and gentle soul who had a heart full of love for everyone. She had a smile that could light up a room and a laugh that could make even the grumpiest person feel happy. But one day, Emily disappeared. Her family and friends searched for her everywhere, but she was nowhere to be found. They put up posters around town, organized search parties, and even hired private investigators, but no one could find any trace of her. Months passed, and everyone gave up hope of ever finding Emily alive. Her family held a memorial service, and her friends tried to move on with their lives, but they could never forget her. And then, one day, her body was found. It was discovered in a shallow grave in the woods, buried under a pile of leaves and dirt. The cause of death was determined to be blunt force trauma to the head, and it was clear that Emily had been murdered. The news sent shockwaves through the community. Everyone was devastated by the loss of such a kind and loving person, and they were outraged that someone could do something so cruel. The police launched an investigation, but the killer was never found. There were no witnesses, no DNA evidence, and no leads. The case went cold, and Emily's murder remained a mystery. But Emily's ghost refused to rest. She haunted the town, appearing to people in their dreams and leaving mysterious signs and symbols around the area where her body had been found. She was determined to find justice, even if it meant haunting the living. The ghostly sightings and strange symbols continued for years, until finally, a breakthrough was made. A new piece of evidence was discovered, and it led the police to a suspect. It turned out to be someone who had been close to Emily, someone who had been jealous of her and had wanted her out of the way. The killer was arrested and put on trial. The evidence was strong, and they were found guilty of Emily's murder. They were sentenced to life in prison, and justice was finally served. Emily's ghost was finally at peace. She could rest knowing that her killer was behind bars and that justice had been done. The town could finally move on from the tragedy, but they would never forget Emily and the impact she had on their lives. Lena was a journalist who specialized in investigating supernatural occurrences. She was known for her boldness and her willingness to go to any lengths to uncover the truth, no matter how dangerous it was. One day, Lena received a tip about a haunted house on the outskirts of town. She knew it was the perfect opportunity to prove herself and decided to investigate. The house was old and abandoned, and the surrounding area was overgrown with weeds and trees. The front door was boarded up, but Lena managed to find a way inside through a broken window. As she explored the house, she felt a strange presence. She heard footsteps and voices, but when she turned around, there was no one there. The air was cold and musty, and the furniture was covered in dust and cobwebs. Lena took out her recorder and started asking questions, hoping to capture any evidence of the supernatural. But as she spoke, she heard a voice respond. It was a deep, menacing voice that sent shivers down her spine. She realized that she was not alone in the house. She was being watched by someone or something. Lena's heart raced as she tried to find a way out, but the doors and windows were all locked. She was trapped, and she knew she had to face whatever was haunting the house. And then, she saw it. In the dim light of the house, Lena saw a figure standing in the shadows. It was tall and thin, with long fingers and a twisted face. It was the stuff of nightmares, and Lena froze in terror. But then, the figure stepped into the light, and Lena saw the truth. It was not a monster, but a man wearing a mask. The voice that she had heard was just a recording that he had played to scare her. Lena realized that she had been duped. The haunted house was just a trap set up to scare her and make her look foolish. She was relieved to be safe, but she was also embarrassed that she had fallen for such a cheap trick. As she left the house, Lena realized that she had been so focused on uncovering the supernatural that she had forgotten to be skeptical. She vowed to never let her guard down again, and to always approach her investigations with caution and skepticism. But as she walked away, she couldn't shake the feeling that there was still something supernatural lurking in the shadows, watching her every move. Once upon a time, in a small town in the middle of nowhere, there lived a man named Samuel. He was a cunning and manipulative person who had no regard for anyone but himself. Samuel would often take advantage of people in the town, making deals and promises he had no intention of keeping. He was a wealthy man, but his wealth came at the expense of others. One day, Samuel made a deal with a group of people in the town to buy their land for a price lower than its actual value. The people agreed, but little did they know, Samuel had no intention of paying them at all. He had found a loophole in the contract that allowed him to keep the land without ever having to pay for it. The people in the town were outraged and they tried to take legal action against Samuel, but he had already bribed the judge and had the case dismissed. In revenge, the people of the town decided to put a curse on Samuel. They went to a local witch and asked her to put a hex on Samuel that would make him suffer the consequences of his actions. The witch agreed to their request and cast a powerful spell on Samuel. From that day on, Samuel began to experience strange and terrifying things. At first, he would hear voices whispering his name in the dead of night, but he couldn't find the source of the sounds. Then, he began to see shadows moving in the corners of his eyes, and he felt a constant sense of unease whenever he was alone. But it wasn't until one dark and stormy night that Samuel truly felt the weight of the curse. As he was walking home from the local tavern, he heard the sound of footsteps behind him. When he turned around, there was no one there. He shrugged it off and kept walking, but the footsteps persisted. Suddenly, a hand reached out and grabbed his shoulder, causing him to jump in terror. Samuel turned around to see a ghostly figure standing before him. It was one of the people he had betrayed, and it was clear that they were not at peace. The figure pointed a bony finger at Samuel and whispered, "You will pay for your sins." From that moment on, Samuel's life became a living nightmare. Everywhere he went, he was haunted by the ghosts of the people he had wronged. He saw their faces in the shadows and heard their voices in the wind. He became a recluse, too afraid to leave his house, but the ghosts found a way to enter his home too. They would move objects, slam doors, and even whisper in his ear as he slept. Samuel's mental state deteriorated rapidly and he began to suffer from hallucinations and paranoid delusions. He became convinced that the ghosts were real and that they were out to get him. One night, in a fit of madness, Samuel set fire to his own house, hoping to destroy the ghosts once and for all. But the fire consumed him as well, and he perished in the flames. The people of the town never forgot what Samuel had done to them, but they also never forgot the lesson they learned from his tragic fate. They knew that their actions could have unintended consequences, and they resolved to never let greed and anger cloud their judgment again.